Hi, I'm Mary Rainer-Skala, Director of Special Initiatives at IAAP, and I'm here today to interview Dan Goldstein about our DIAC project. So Dan, the Disability Inclusion Accessibility Criteria, or DIAC as we're calling it, is your vision, and you are the originator and compiler of the criteria. What are the criteria and what is the background story of how they came to be?
Well, Mary, these criteria are the guidance that companies deserve but haven't gotten. The law is not much help on what a company should do, except for the standards for accessible design. The ADA is all about what not to do. Do not discriminate. But don't you think a company should have guidance on what to do to be accessible and inclusive of disabled people? Take, for example, if a chief executive wants to broaden the company's customer base by being more accessible and more welcoming to customers with disabilities, what are the steps they need to take? If a company wants to protect its employees with disabilities in the event of an emergency, just as they're trying to protect their other employees, if, say, there's a tornado or an active shooter, what does the company need to do in terms of their emergency planning? As I approached retirement, it became clear to me that many companies need and want comprehensive guidance on the range of issues around disability inclusion and accessibility. Questions like, when we build company apps, how can we reliably know that the end product will be accessible, that the company's not going to face litigation risk and extra engineering costs? Because, when you have to retrofit something, it becomes much more expensive than when you build accessibility in from the beginning. So companies deserve to have answers to these questions, but they get them at best piecemeal, and so often in reaction after there's already been an issue and somebody has encountered barriers or not been included. So if we're going to have comprehensive answers, where should they come from? You've heard the expression, nothing about us without us, from the disability community. Well, I want to tell you, it's a shorter statement now. It's nothing without us. At least to me, it's obvious that the information as to what the disability community seeks from businesses should come from the disability community. So in crafting these criteria, I started in 2017 to talk to what I sometimes call the organizations, that is, organizations whose membership is composed of persons with disabilities and their families. So I talked to the National Federation of the Blind, the National Association of the Deaf, United Spinal, the National Center for Independent Living, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, the European Federation of Hard of Hearing Organizations, the ARC, and others. And in each instance, we sat down and tried to generate statements of what that disability group wanted from a company. As a customer, as an employee, and as a job applicant. We worked to make these statements as specific as we could and testable. And we also used the experience of these organizations to generate criteria about the governance steps that are necessary to ensure that the effort will work and the results will last. For example, almost all of these organizations had the experience of sitting down with a company, laying out a set of goals to be accomplished. Everybody in the room was in favor. And then they didn't happen. And repeatedly, what we found out was at least two problems. Sometimes just one, sometimes the other. One was that the persons who were responsible for taking these steps never had accessibility responsibilities put in their job descriptions and didn't have it in their performance reviews. And most certainly, their managers didn't have it either. So when the time crunch came, accessibility didn't happen. It was not part of anybody's job. So one of the criteria addresses that issue. Another is that we found out in one instance that the reason nothing ever happened was there was no mechanism for reporting on progress up to the CEO level. And the CEO kind of thought his job was done when there was an agreement about what to do going forward. So there's a criteria that addresses the kind of leadership that's needed to make this work and last. Now, I think you also asked me how the criteria came to be. And that really, it came out of bad news. In 2017, when I was preparing to retire, I'd been representing the National Federation of the Blind for 34 years. And beginning in 2000, I had really focused on non-visual accessibility to digital products, voting machines, websites, ATMs, educational software, the whole gamut. And it was clear to me after these years of work that it was worse being a person with a disability in 2017 than it was in 2000, not better. For example, the internet was expanding far, far faster than the accessibility of the internet. In 2016, I saw a survey from WebAIM. They looked at the home pages of the 1 million most popular websites, and they found that 98.75% were inaccessible. And indeed, those web pages averaged 60 barriers per page. I realized that if we just went with the regular tools in the toolbox, legislation, litigation, regulation, we couldn't get there from here. We needed something else. And I reflected on the many meetings that we had had when I was representing NFB with companies where they were actually eager to know what did they need to do, what was required, what were the steps. But it also was clear to me sometimes that how to get there was also unclear. You know, when I first started settling matters for the National Federation of the Blind, I would say, go ask your developers how long it will take to make the website accessible. And then because all web developers are optimists, we'll double that amount of time. And we'll put in the settlement agreement that the website will be YCAG 2.0 compliant by whatever that date was, the doubling of the time that the web developer said they needed. And then it wouldn't happen. And it wouldn't happen because the companies didn't realize they needed to do things like include accessibility in job descriptions. And so I realized we can't stop at saying, there's the goal line, you know how to get there. We need to say, there's the goal line, and if you'd like to know how to get there, here is some additional information. Now, as this idea began to germinate in my brain, was also the time when, as somebody about to retire, I got asked to speak at a lot of conferences, to give the keynote at CSUN and so on. And so I started putting this idea out there to see what response it got. And you, Mary, were in the audience for one of those talks. and you stayed awake and you came up afterwards and proposed that the International Association of Accessibility Professionals provide the home for these criteria. And I explained that these organizations would not want their names associated with something that could be changed without their consent. But IAAP agreed that the criteria would be controlled by a steering committee composed of disability advocacy groups. And IAAP also knew that we needed technical assistance. The disability organizations knew that they wanted things like a policy of procuring employees facing software that was accessible. But how do you get there from here? What kind of training is needed by the folks in procurement? What kind of guidance do they need to have? Can they just accept the vendor's word that they're accessible? But the IAAP provided a technical advisory group who could assist with drafting additional criteria that would flesh that out so that the guidance really would be from birth to grave. And those criteria then went to the steering committee to review, modify, and if acceptable, approve. So that's how it came to be that we were doing this with IAAP, and it's been a tremendously productive and fruitful partnership.
A lot of hard work and a lot of exciting journey that you're talking about here. What are the next steps, and how do you hope companies will use these criteria?
Well, with a 6-year gestation period, I think we've exceeded the elephant, and we're ready to get rolling here. The time has come to get corporate feedback, and we hope some pilots underway. We don't want the companies to have to guess as to what the disability community wants. These are an attempt at a comprehensive answer, these criteria, but we need to know how they're going to work for companies. You know, there are nearly 200 of these criteria, and they span all disabilities, all kinds of disabilities. But the businesses are just as varied in size, in the nature of the business, in how those businesses are organized. Some of this is going to be entirely new for companies. I suspect there are companies that only started thinking about emergency planning and disaster resilience when the pandemic hit. And now we're saying, well, you've got to think of this also in the context of disabled customers and employees. So for those companies, these criteria, we hope, are going to be effective and useful. There's a group of criteria, and they're categorized into 10 categories, excuse me, called leadership and accountability. I think these apply to all companies, and they're critical to success. When leadership doesn't drive the initiative, success in accessibility and inclusion isn't sustainable. Creating and implementing policies and processes help embed accessibility and inclusion and protect against backsliding. So those pieces, the training pieces, these are pieces that I think will apply across the board. But I don't think that all companies are going to need or want to do all 200 criteria. And some simply aren't going to apply. I mean, for example, we have criteria here addressing the need for a deaf space conference room and also a conference room where the hard of hearing can have the use of loops and have low enough background noise that they can hear and the like. If you're talking about retail outlets for mobile phones in malls, that space is too small to have separate conference rooms. It may be fine for the headquarters, but it's not going to work in a shopping center where you've got only a couple hundred square feet. You may be a medium-sized company, and you definitely want to procure employee-facing software that's accessible, but you're not big enough that the vendor is going to pay any attention to you. Is there a benefit in asking? Yes, because the more that the software vendors hear that there's a demand for accessibility, the more they're going to realize they can compete better if they are accessible. But it's just a criterion that you may not be able to meet because of your size. So not all of these things, this is not a one size fits all. This is, look at these criteria. They're organized and sortable according to facilities, according to communication, according to app development, all sorts of different ways these things can be sliced, and see what works for you, what can help you move on something you haven't addressed, what can improve something you have addressed. That's where we're going next, is to find out and get feedback from companies, what works, what doesn't, so that we can make these more corporate friendly.
So what benefits do you think a company will derive from using the criteria?
Well, I think they're going to save money. I think they're going to make money. I think they're going to reduce litigation risk, and I think they're going to create a better workforce. Let me take those one by one. Right now, most companies, most of the time, are reacting to accessibility barriers after they're encountered. And rather than moving before the barrier is created to create a barrier-free environment. After the fact fixes are always going to cost more money. If you build a skyscraper and then go, an elevator, you've just doubled the cost of the building. But if you had put the elevator into your design at the beginning, then obviously it would be a marginal cost. Instead, certainly less of a cost. Right now, what happens is that these after the fact fixes are usually not as effective. And good corporate leaders try to foresee what needs to be done, because those things that are unanticipated routinely cause expense and delay. So money will be saved by addressing these issues before you have to. Secondly, you're going to make more money. We're now in an age where it's long past time to think of disabled persons as persons without disposable income. There are all these baby boomers like me who are outliving their ears, outliving their eyes, facing mobility issues that come with age or illness. But we make good customers. And a company is going to want us as customers. So implementing these criteria will show that you are welcoming and barrier-free for people with disabilities. The third advantage is the better workforce. Many persons with disabilities, and obviously there's a limit to how much you can go from generalization to the specific, but many persons with disabilities are superb problem solvers. They wake up each morning in a world that wasn't designed for them, and they have to figure out how to do what they need to do when their particular disability makes that more difficult. So you're talking about a creative workforce, one that is good at problem solving, but also highly motivated workers. Most people with disabilities in the workforce know that the unemployment rate for people with disabilities is very, very high. For the employable blind, for example, the rate has been between 70 and 75% from World War II to now, and the needle hasn't moved. So a blind employee with a job is going to do everything they have to do to keep that job. If it means walking through 5 miles of snowstorm when everything's closed down, they're going to do it. Obviously, these are broad generalizations, but more true than not. And finally, a workforce with people with disabilities present different experiences and perspectives that educate their coworkers and improve your products and services. And then I mentioned litigation risk, and isn't that obvious? If you're removing barriers, you're transparent about it, not only are you less likely to get sued, but I'm sure it's annoying for companies to have to pay plaintiffs' attorneys' fees. They certainly weren't pleased having to pay mine. But if you were already on track to fix the problem and you'd announced that, no court is going to find that that the plaintiff's attorney is a catalyst entitled to fees. So these are some of the virtues. I just want to say, in the last 10 years, I think there's been a sea change. And we've gone more and more from companies seeing accessibility, inclusivity as a burden to seeing these things as a positive good that is for the benefit of corporations. Our hope is that these criteria will provide guidance that you want and can use.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this, Dan. We're looking forward to seeing companies join this project and commit to it, and really looking forward to hearing the success stories that I think will follow.
Thank you.